Good evening. This is 2020 Church, and I'm Pastor Larry Enriquez. You know, normally, as we present the teaching to you as 2020 Church, we record the day before, and then it's edited by Larissa. She does a great job in doing what she does to get that ready for you. But she's been preoccupied up in the Running Springs area. Well, let me backtrack just a tiny bit here. We're in the throes of summer for Southern California. The hottest days, or I should say weeks of the year, are generally speaking July, August, and September. And so we have in these last couple weeks a scorching heat, so to speak. Consequently, it also becomes our fire season. And here in Southern California, where we live, almost on the cusp of LA, San Bernardino County, we're surrounded by fires. There was a fire just north of us, 8 miles north of us, yesterday, the day before, and we really had to evacuate. So we evacuated the children and some of the ladies who were going to care for the children, and some of us men and a couple of the ladies stayed back, and we thought we'd just hang out here for various reasons. We weren't in imminent danger, and so we thought it was wise to just stay here. And so we did. And today it's clear. It's cleared up. But there's still a fire that's still raging north of us, and it's going east now. Then my daughter Larissa and her husband Stephen and Larissa Dubois live up in Running Springs. And there's the line fire. Ours is called the bridge fire. That's the line fire. They're surrounded by fire. They've seen the flames. They've been ordered to evacuate. They did not. And a lot of this is going to be in reference to their staying behind. And we'll get to that in a little bit. And so we didn't record, but we thought it would be wise to present you something live in light of all of that. And by the way, there's fires in Orange County and in Riverside County. We're literally surrounded by fires, and we have bad air quality. Today was a cooler day. Tomorrow's even cooler. We'll be a little bit below even what normal should be. So we'll have average to cooler days coming up. But we've had hot days up to yesterday or through yesterday. Oftentimes when I've taught, I've referenced this principle. It's been a historical principle for Christians, that when there's a fire, Christians run towards it in order to help, not to get in the way, and not to go against things that would make us a detriment to a scene or to an incident. But where we can help, we should run towards the fire and not from the fire. And so as I've said that over the many messages I've given, where that is something I can say, I tell as Christians, we should be running towards the fire. And I also said it in light of the whole pandemic thing, that as Christians are called to run from the fire by their pastors and churches, and hunker down and make sure you're safe. I was saying it's not our job. I think we need to be there helping people in the midst of the pandemic. Well, anyway, that being said, I think that there are real issues in this world where Christians have stayed behind in order to do God's work there. And consequently, today is September 11th, and we commemorate 9/11 and the towers that were bombed by passenger planes, and the thousands that were killed, not just those who were in the towers, but those who went to help. So in light of that, it's appropriate to kind of title this, Running Towards the Fire. I think that as things happen in this world and in this life, that we want to be those who can be helpers, those who are doing good deeds, and where we can be the gospel by being the Lord's hands and the Lord's feet. So we now come to this particular day in light of the fires that surround us. Back to that whole thing and the fact that my son-in-law Stephen and my daughter Larissa have stayed behind in Running Springs to lend a hand, to be a help, to be God's hands and feet there, to do their part. And I'm sure there are other Christians who've done the same. So first, you can't go through life being afraid. You have to go through life being courageous and working through the fears. I want to add that being courageous doesn't mean that you don't experience the emotions of fear. You don't let, as best you can, the fears overtake you, and you run through the fears to do God's bidding, even in the midst of those fears. And sometimes real fears in the sense that there's real danger involved. But to do God's work sometimes means being in the danger. We have to be careful because, and me too, I want to be careful not to always give these words, these two words that sound so caring but can be detrimental. Be safe. Because sometimes being safe becomes the priority. And I'm not too sure that it is. There may be times that it is, but I try to be a little more clear and say, when they're driving up or down the mountain, or when they're going on a trip here or there, to say, have fun, have a great time, do God's bidding, bring back good reports and a lot of pics, and be safe too. I want to make being safe somewhere at the bottom of what's being said. It's not at the top. That being safe isn't the priority for us, but being courageous and adventurous, and of course, being godly, doing God's work. I retired this year as a 28-year chaplain with Ontario Police Department. Most of you hearing this know that. But in my retirement, what I think disappointed me the most looking back over the years was during the COVID experience, that although we had a very active PD and a chief that was very anti-woke in light of the pandemic's governmental responses to that we're going to go out there, that they didn't do that with the chaplains. They were like, no, the COVID, we're not going to send you out. I said, no, send us out. I said, send me out. I don't care about the COVID. If there's somebody out there who needs the chaplain, send me out. But they just didn't do that. So it was very disappointing to me. So I'm very familiar with that idea because as a church we stayed open during the pandemic because I thought it was vital for us to be there doing God's work and not being fearful of what the COVID may do. So I want to look at that whole idea and say that though we may be afraid, I didn't want to catch a bad flu, and I don't want to be in harm's way, but sometimes we need to do that, to be in harm's way and to be willing to catch a bug, to do God's will, to do God's work. But how do we know when it's foolishness to be in harm's way and when it's God's will to be in harm's way? And I'm not saying that I have the answer to all of that, but I think that when we're called to do good deeds in the name of Jesus, when we're called to do unto others as we would have them do unto us, when we're called to be of good faith and to be of good will and to go forward and to do that, that we need to experience the reality that sometimes those good deeds, that goodwill, that do unto others as I would have them do unto me, means being in harm's way. And so, though it may look foolish to others, it may be God's will that we do his bidding in the midst of there being the possibility of harm I remember the words of Paul when he's in the book of Acts, when he's being told by friends not to go in a particular direction of his life because there could be harm to him. And he says, in fact, I wrote down some notes. Let me see. I think I wrote that note down somewhere. By the way, I didn't expect this to be a message that would last the length of a regular 2020 church teaching. I just wanted to address this idea of running towards the flame and why we're not recording as we normally would be, because Larissa didn't come down the mountain. But if I can, let me see if I can find that verse. It's here somewhere in the book of Acts. Paul's responding. I'm going to read out of the Message. It's a paraphrase, but the word in the Greek is the right one to use the word compelled. So I did that study before I went to the Message to give you this rendering. Here's what it says. But there is another urgency before me. There's that word urgency. Sometimes in life we feel an urgency. And it's subjective. In other words, it's what I personally feel. And you may not feel it. It's a subjective response. It's an internal response. But it's not an internal response based on nothing. It's an internal response based on an objective truth. The objective truth, the truth outside of me, outside of my feelings, is do God's bidding, is to do good deeds, is to help others, is to love others, is to be out for another's good. That's objective. The internal thing is the feeling that says, I'm compelled to go do it this way in this circumstance. So he says, but there's another urgency before me. I feel compelled to go to Jerusalem. That word in the Greek deo means to be bound morally to an inner calling. I can't always tell you when you experience that. We can always second guess and be that quarterback who's looking at the play after the game, which isn't very fair. But I would say that in times in life, you might feel this urgent compulsion, that is that desire, the urge to go. And another party that says, no, no, no. You need to really check out to see if that compulsion to want to go do something, the urgency to do it, make sure that it is the Spirit or that it's not the Spirit. If it's a moral compulsion, it's I can do good there. I can really lend a hand. I can really help somebody. I can save somebody. I can add my prayers to somebody while I'm there in a real way. Then maybe I need to go. It's God. Even though I'm in harm's way, I need to go. So this week, I had sent a word up to Stephen and Larissa, my son-in-law and daughter, to come down the mountain as the fire was encroaching upon them and they were mandated to evacuate. I was told that they were watering down the roof and their property. And I said, you're surrounded by forest and other cabins and houses. If they're not watering down their roofs or watering down the trees and they catch on fire and combust, then I don't care how much you water your roof. Your house is going to catch on fire. Just get out. Just be safe. Of course, what was my primary intent was be safe, because I don't want them to get hurt, and I don't want to experience the loss or the tragedy or the horrific experience of loss of family. But I did send them a note and said, I pray that you would do God's work while you're there. as long as they're going to call you to do it, go do it, and be safe. I did say that, but now I want him to come home. But then I got this message from Stephen, and I didn't ask his permission to read it, but he wrote it to the whole family, and others can read it too. So it's not private in that regard. So I feel at ease to read it to you. So let me read it to you, and then I'll speak in light of this. We have decided not to evacuate as of yet, but are packed and ready to leave in 30 seconds or less. This decision is firstly based on our faith in God for protection, along with actual visuals of the fire itself and valuable information we're getting hourly from live firefighters in person. So they had that relationship going on while they were there. And I like the idea of saying, God's protection, because, sometimes we're promised a protection, I think, again, internally, from maybe physical harm, but sometimes the protection is something that's beyond the physical. And sometimes the very physical life is taken. Well, I'll address that in a little bit to you. Well, let me just say it now. That in history past, there have been real plagues, especially plagues in the Middle East and in Europe, that were deadly plagues. And widespread Christianity remained behind to help those who were plagued in the plagues. Historically, writers wrote about the love of these so-called Christians who put their lives at stake to help those who were sick. One of the lines I remember written historically by those who were present at the time, I remember the line saying, "Oh, how they loved one another," talking about Christians and the unique love that they were able to reveal in their actions of helping the sick. And many of those who stayed behind died of, they got the plague. They weren't safe from the plague. Some were, some weren't. Was God there with them? Well, of course he was. It was a form of martyrdom, wasn't it? But that said, he writes, first of all, we believe in God's protection in this case. We've been able to support firefighters and people because we have been able to support firefighters, directions on fire trails and city roads from my days riding here, while also providing updates to locals, neighbors, and friends on the status of the fire in their homes. The fire that was threatening our little town has been reduced to minor coals with engines on watch. There was a flare-up today, and he went on and said some things about the flare-ups that were there. He went on to say this: I have linked to South Tower, and South Tower cam directly monitoring the fire and updates every 30 seconds, streaming to my living room. And we have a generator, even though the power's out, we're able to keep these things going. God's will be done. And please know that the moment it becomes evident that it could be coming our way, we're out. We're providing updates to the locals, supporting neighbors and firemen any way we can, while also taking any precautions to protect our home. I just felt that was great. That's a good report. Because I think as much as they wanted to protect their homes, they wanted to do God's bidding, even above their home, even beyond their home. I think that's the call to Christians. And I think that without them saying, in fact, they probably should never say it, but without them saying, they're going to be, and they are, God's hands and feet. They're Jesus on the spot. Today, they fed their neighbors many pets. He wrote us about the many pets he fed today regarding his neighbors. They're doing God's bidding there, God's work there. So as we live out our lives, may we not be afraid, but may we do God's work, God's wonderful work, even when there is the possibility of harm. We should run to the fire. Unless we're compelled not to for some reason, we're called to run to the fire. The Bible says to go do God's good work. In Ephesians it says that He has good works for us to walk in, and they were set out before we were even born for us to walk in the good deeds that He has for us. Let's know what the good deed is and go out and do it. That's my call to you. Well, I have a bad attitude at times. I think I should let my wife do a little series on that, on working through Larry's bad attitudes. But here's the deal, is that sometimes I will just have a nasty disposition, but it doesn't usually show on my face because I'm wise enough to go like this. Look, Larry, you're a pastor. Don't show your heart at this point because your heart's pretty stinky right now. Well, I don't want to be two-faced. I want to be real. I want to be honest with you. That sometimes I go to a store and I just have a nasty disposition. I'm on a task. And I work through it by doing this. I really do this. Look for anybody who needs help and help them. Do good deeds. I can't tell you how many grocery baskets I took from people to help them out. Yesterday at Trader Joe's, I had 3 baskets that I was putting because I told one, I just pointed at the guy, hold on, because he couldn't park in a parking space where somebody left the cart. I took the cart and another one walked away, and he had a smile on his face as I was taking the carts from the parking lot into, because it was so hot, people didn't want to. I don't think the clerks wanted to come out and mess with the carts. But here's the point: I'm not some great person out there. I'm not patting myself in the back. I do that because by doing good deeds, it helps me scare off the bad attitude. I make it run away by being active and intentional about being kind. Because if I'm not, the old man will come back and want to give me a bad attitude. So I try to work at it by just doing good deeds for people whenever I can, to help, to lift, to encourage. Maybe it's a small way, but let's find a way, courage, to run to the fires of life, to find courage in the doing, to find grace in the doing. You see, if you think in advance, can I do it? You won't have the grace. Only at the time will you know God's grace when you actually enter into doing the good deed, the good action, to be Christ's feet and Christ's hands. Well, thank you, Carl, for doing the filming on the spur of the moment when Larissa wasn't able to come down. So anyway, I hope this is beneficial to you. May God bless you. May God keep you. And I hope to see you this Sunday. Go in peace.